everybody. So today I'm going to talk about this book. This is The Walking Dead, part of the No Way Out series. This is part 3. This came out in March of 2011. Pretty good book. And I'm going to compare it to the TV show, which is fantastic. But even though we're only on 82, there are some pretty major differences between the comic book and the show. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly kind of summarize the comic book, summarize the show that kind of goes along with this one, and so we can compare and contrast just how different and similar they are. They kind of walk the same path, but there are some major differences. I hope you enjoy it. Issue 82 from March 2011, which is part 3 of the No Way Out storyline, lines up pretty well with Season 6, Episode 8, titled Start to Finish. In the comic, the walkers have surrounded the group and Morgan gets bit in the Rick helps him up, but they get overrun, and then Michonne jumps in like a badass and saves everyone and quickly cuts off Morgan's arm. Abraham and the survivors jump in and clear a path for Michonne and Rick to get Morgan out of there. Rosita and Eugene jump in to fight and help. Glenn, Andrea, Spencer, and Heath are trapped on the roof and trying to figure out what to do. They get Morgan back to Rick's house and they get him patched up. Then Maggie runs to the door with Sophia. So at this point in the TV show, Sophia, who is Carol's daughter, is already dead. Andrea, who is with Glenn in the comic up on the roof, Andrea's already dead in the show. And Abraham, who's fighting, is with Daryl and Sasha, and they are actually away from Alexandria at this point. In the show, this is all the aftermath of what happened when the wolves tried to take over Alexandria. The bell tower's fallen onto the walls, and the walkers are piling into the town. And Rick tells everybody to run and cover. And then we see all the main characters fight their way to safety. But in the process, Deanna, the mayor, is bitten, and Rick, Michonne, and Carl get her back to Jesse's house. Carol and Morgan end up in the house where they have the wolf that they captured from the previous episode, and that they're keeping him there. Now Maggie ends up being chased up into the watchtower by a horde of walkers, and she's trapped. Rosita, Tara, and Eugene are able to find an open garage and trap themselves in to get away from the horde. In the show, Glenn and Enid are the ones outside of Alexandria, and they get into a big fight because Enid wants to run, but Glenn says he can't leave the group and Maggie. Later, they climb a tree and they helplessly look at the horde as they walk through the streets, not knowing what to do. In the comic, Abraham tells everybody to retreat. There are just too many walkers and they all run into houses. Rick and company watch the walkers walk the streets, while Carl is more concerned with Morgan turning into a zombie and finds himself alone with him and ready to put him down if needed. Well, apparently this is a good time for Rick and Jesse to mess around because, why not, I guess. Meanwhile, Carl and Morgan are having a heart-to-heart, and Morgan starts to talk about his son Dwayne, who had died. While stuck on the roof, some of the group try to convince the others that they should just leave Rick and company behind and save themselves. This is similar to how Enid was trying to convince Glenn that they should just leave. But in the comic, Andrea is not happy about it and ends up punching Spencer in the face. Rick starts to work on a plan to get everybody in that house out, but Jesse gets mad because he's essentially planning on abandoning the rest of the group and leaving them to die. In the show, Deanna comes to terms with her inevitable demise. Carl has a big fight with Jesse's oldest son, Ron, and ends up letting the walkers into the house to kind of have a big fight, and they get in. Jesse's youngest son, Sam's freaking out about the zombies because he's deathly afraid of them, and is freaking out because the mayor, who's been bitten, is right across the hall from him. Carol and Morgan have a big fight about what to do with the wolf that they captured. Carol wants to kill him, but Morgan doesn't, and then the wolf ends up taking Denise hostage and escapes. Rick decides that he's going to get all the guns and use the noise to get the walkers away. But then, because of the fight, a bunch of the walkers get into the house, and he decides he's got to get everybody in the house out. And then he goes with Old Reliable and tells everybody, hey, take these dead zombies and smear their guts all over you. And then the plan is to sneak past the horde. It's worked before, it's gonna work again. Toward the end of the episode, instead of killing herself, Deanna's final act of defiance is taking her pistol and shooting 6 walkers before presumably they tear her apart. It's a pretty intense scene. And at the very end, Rick, Carl, Judith, Michonne, Jessie and her 2 boys are seen with guts all over them, walking through the crowd of walkers with no issue. And then the youngest starts calling, Mom, Mom. So I find it kind of interesting how Kirkman kind of rewrote the story a little bit to make it, I guess, more TV friendly. It's such a long running series. Both the comic book and the shows ran for years and years and years. But it's interesting to see how he kind of stayed with the same storyline, but kind of veered off majorly. So, I mean, in the comic book, as we saw that there are still characters that are in the comic book that are dead in the show. There are characters in the show that are never made into the comic book. Daryl, for example, is not going to be in here. And everybody loves Daryl. Daryl was a great character. But I enjoyed the comic book. I enjoyed the show. I thought they were both great. So I hope you're enjoying my little synopsis, my little compare and contrast. That was 82. Next up is going to be 90. That is my next oldest book. So we're going to look at this one and see where it falls into the show and what's going on in the book. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All the pink in the world can't disguise the irrefutable fact that centaurs and castles and dragons and magic are all standard nerd tropes. Ergo, My Little Pony is nerdy. Ergo, you, Erica, are a nerd.